Welcome to another episode of Michigan Tech's Husky Hour. In this episode of Husky Hour, a panel of guests offers advice on professional communication. Learn about effective ways to appropriately communicate with professors, show yourself off to employers, and ensure the points you're trying to make are understood. Enjoy!
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Dana Browning. I'm the Assistant Director for Outreach and Education at the Center for Student Mental Health and Wellbeing. And we are here today to talk about professional communication in this Husky Hour.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily. I'm a third-year psychology student, and I am one of the interns for the Center for Student Mental Health and Wellbeing department. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to have all of you here.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Honholt. I'm the Associate Director of Career Services. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Hi, I'm Amy Monty and an advisor in engineering fundamentals. I work with the first year engineering students.
Hi, I'm Jen Sams. I run the instruction and education team in the library.
My name's Emily. I'm a PhD candidate in environmental engineering.
My name is Allie. I am from Kalamazoo, Michigan, currently living in Chicago. I went to Michigan State University with a degree in communication and have been working in the human resources and recruiting department at a company called Redwood Logistics.
So what are some of the basic tips for communicating professionally?
I have, from a faculty standpoint, comment about professional communications, especially via email. It was frequently that I would get questions. I have a question about the homework. Well, I taught more than one class, so I would need to know what class, what section, who you are, which homework assignment. And so when you're doing communications, especially via email, it's giving those details that you need. And I think that can also be applied to a job situation. I'm applying for a job. Which job? What company? What location? Why are you qualified? So it's giving that detailed information to help in those communications.
I really like that response. I'll also add to that, it's sometimes productive to get into the mind of the person to whom you're writing that note to, or even to whom you're speaking to. I attended a great class on this a couple of years ago. It was a professional development course, and they said, always get your ask out of the way early and first. So I am writing to you to talk to you about this. And have that as a single line, be very specific, kind of like what Amy's saying. I have a question about this particular set of homework problems on this particular course, right, with this particular course. And then the next paragraph down, you can go into a little bit of context. And then you can kind of finish up at the end by saying, thank you, and, looking forward to talking with you about this soon. So I think it's a direct, enough background. You're not overloading them, but it's also at the same time very succinct.
Yeah, just to build on that. So I work at, I do some time at our research help desk in the library. So you may have talked to me or some of the folks I work with there. And we get a lot of questions like what Amy was describing, where it's just, I want to find sources, which is great. That is what we're there for. But a little bit more context helps us help you. And then the follow-up is, we get a lot of questions where it's clear the person who is writing to us doesn't know if we are the right person to ask about that thing. So that little bit of context lets me actually get your question to the person who should see it. So if it's a question that I can't answer, then great, I have the context to do so. And if I don't, we don't have to do a lot of back and forth. I can just say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but Dana does, and I'm going to send you right to her, and you can get to where you need a little bit faster. So that context is really, really helpful.
How do you portray your excitement or passion about something without being overly enthusiastic or fake? And I think obviously, when you do things via email, so much gets lost from tone, and even with Zoom, sometimes things get lost. So how do you convey authenticity?
I'll jump in here. I tend to be a heavy user of the exclamation marks in emails. And so I'll oftentimes, like if I'm reaching out about an internship or a job that I want to apply for, I have found myself, I'll write it the way I'm feeling very excited, exclamation marks after every sentence. But then what I do is I go back and edit the email, and I try to only include one, maybe two sentences with exclamation marks, and I instead just focus on my word choice, I'll convey something I'm very excited about this position, and then identify a couple of reasons why, and then maybe sign off with an exclamation mark. And so far it's been fairly successful.
I was going to echo that. I was going to say that exactly. I do tend to notice it's a pet peeve of mine to see too many exclamation points. I'm glad to hear that that's getting moderated. But I just like using the direct words. I am very excited. I'm thrilled to be a part of this. It's something I've looked at and admired for some time. And, I would be very excited to be a part of the team.
So I would follow up with what Chris had to say, in that in addition to that excitement, show them that you have some knowledge. So if you're applying for a job and you're excited about it, I'm excited about this because it fits with my career goals, which are, and you do this and I want to be able to do that, and so it's sharing your knowledge, showing that you have knowledge that backs up that passion.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you guys face with effective communication, especially in light of none of us being able to see each other in person anymore?
I can speak to one of the Zoom challenges, which is you're in a Zoom meeting and you have something else pop up on your computer. And so staying engaged in the Zoom meeting instead of going and taking care of those other things that are on the computer, especially if you don't have your face up. You could be muted and just working away and not really fully present in the meeting. The other thing that I'm trying to learn is to have my Zoom screen close to my camera, so that I'm looking at you instead of looking at my other part of the screen, because I have two screens, and you can see how you feel when I look away is as if I'm not looking at you. So trying to keep my Zoom next to my camera so that I am looking at you and you see me looking at you.
I was going to talk about one of the challenges that I think just in general, a lot of people would rather send an email or a text as their kind of preferred method of communication, because a lot of times it's easier to get your thoughts out or maybe hide behind an email, but really the most effective communication is going to be talking to someone over video or email or in person. So you can read facial expressions and not read into things too over email. Things can get misinterpreted. So I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of people is feeling comfortable talking in person or over the phone versus just firing off an email.
And to sort of piggyback off of that, one thing that I've found really challenging in this era of Zoom is the loss of some of those more informal conversations. Like an email tends to feel a little bit more formal, even a Zoom meeting. Whereas if I had sort of just this random idea, I could pop into somebody's office and say, hey, is this going to work if I try this? Whereas now I have to set up a Zoom meeting to ask them that. And so trying to figure out strategies to recapture that interaction has been really, really challenging without falling into the trap of sort of really informal communication. So we use Slack in the library as our internal thing. And, it's really easy to send a lot of cat pictures on that, which we do. So sort of trying to find that balance has been real tricky.
That does make me think about, when we get to meet with someone face to face, it's necessarily collaborative. So it's not just, hey, do you think this works, right? You're kind of arcing ideas off of one another. And that's when you can really kind of have these amazing discoveries. And it's kind of the benefit of us having groups, right? And kind of being a part of a team. And Zoom is I guess the best substitute, but I'm really looking forward to getting us back to the point where, you can just kind of do those informal pop-bys, because there's just a lot of great productivity that comes out of those, especially if they're timed correctly.
So while we are on that subject, do you guys have any tips and tricks to help keep camaraderie and teamwork alive remotely over Zoom through social distancing, all of the above?
Just a group chat. Everybody's shooting pictures of one another. It's the cats, right? Oh, look at that, or whatever else. So, I do believe in social distance, kind of get-togethers, but unfortunately, there's just no substitute for it in my mind.
So last spring when things were kind of starting up, we had an everyday in the department, a standing meeting for a half hour where anyone could pop in and it was just a social time. And then over the summer, it became a once a week. And now we have lunch on Fridays. And so people might be sitting at their desk, but we're at a Zoom meeting lunch. And so it just gives us that time. With some of my other advisor colleagues, we'll go for a walk. You know, not so much this week as we did prior when it was nicer out before the rain started, but we'd go out for a walk and be able to have some of those conversations. But it does take a little more planning.
Yeah, I think that's just important, that intentionality and being deliberate is so important now. And, you know, I think that's just a good rule of thumb in communication in general. Like right now, it's important to be deliberate and reach out to people so that we can make those connections and like redeem whatever mental health we have left at the end of or during COVID. You know, also, you know, when you're talking to employers or professors, you know, just that. And, you know, what Emily was describing earlier, like going through and changing her word choice and using, you know, removing the exclamation points, it's that sense of deliberacy and intentionality that's so important. You know, with professional communication, like you don't want it to be off the cuff. You want it to be planned out, is a little bit more the professional side.
So that actually sounds like a really good segue to another question we had prepared was, how do you pick the right communication method based on the audience, and what would some of those examples be?
I think it starts by thinking about who your audience is, and if you already have any communication that's in process, you know, kind of following that approach. But you can also ask your audience. I think a direct approach is always the best. If you don't have the answer, just ask. So if it's a professor and you're not sure what the best communication method is, maybe look back at your syllabus. Did they say in there initially what the best contact method was? If not, ask them. Same thing if you're on a group project in a class, you know, ask your peers how they prefer the contact or communication to be.
Yeah, and to add to what Allie said, so I'm doing research and I'm working with a couple of people, my advisors right now, and the way we communicate through COVID has just kind of evolved organically. One of them, it's still fairly formal. We really only communicate via email and our weekly Google Meet meetings. And then my other advisor, we're calling each other and texting each other every few days throughout this one project that we're working on. And it never happened so formally. It was more just we started needing something kind of quickly. And so we would call each other. And then we realized that sometimes that's just more convenient when we're editing a manuscript together and I need feedback by the end of the day. If my email is going to get lost in the 100 other emails she's getting, then it's easier for me to just call and say, hey, I just sent you this draft. Can you take a look at it today? And so that's something, so far it seems to have been pretty successful and worked pretty well for all three of us.
I also try to think about what my ask is and how I'm going to want to need that information back. Right, if I know I'm going to want and need something in writing, I'm going to probably send my question or my inquiry in writing. Similarly, if it's something that I don't need immediately and I want to make sure that all of that context and that background information is still easily accessible to somebody, I probably will send a whole email. But if, like what Emily was describing, I just need a quick response or a quick heads up, you know, I might pick up the phone or send a text. So knowing a little bit of context about what that person is doing and how they're going to interact with this thing that you're sending is really beneficial as well. I've also, so thinking about emails, and as you all are talking about it, one of the things I have been more and more careful about over time is to be extremely descriptive in the subject of my emails so that somebody knows what this email is about without opening it. So like 3 days later, they can skim through their list of 100 unopened emails and be like, okay, it's this one. That I found super helpful.
What's an appropriate way to set boundaries to protect your own mental health and wellness And how do you kind of balance like being a disposable person that's maybe getting used too much, or being a slacker and not engaging enough?
I like the calendar. I just use the calendar to my advantage, right? So if I need to schedule an hour-long lunch every day, it's on the schedule. If I'm going to schedule workout sessions 5:30 to 7 every single night, that's on the schedule. If I'm taking vacation days, that's on the calendar, and share that calendar widely so folks can know when I'm in and when I'm out of the office. And then the other thing, you know, if I've got a work block, I know that deadline coming up, I'll just build out that schedule, you know, a couple days in advance to make sure that it gets done. And in a way that, you know, that time is fenced so I'm not reactive to it. I'm doing it very deliberately.
Yeah,
So I do a similar thing with my schedule as well. And there are times when I make it private. You know, I don't want everyone seeing what it is that I'm doing, but I block that time anyway. And it may be that I'm taking a walk with a friend, but I just don't want everyone to know I'm blocking my lunch. And so I go into my calendar and there's an option of saying private. And that means that the people in my department don't see, you know, who I'm going for the walk with. They see all of my other information. The other thing is, you know, protecting my home time by protecting my personal email and protecting my cell phone. You know, I give my cell phone to certain people more now that, you know, we're working in different locations than I did before. But I don't give my cell phone out freely to everyone. And I have a different email that's not my work email. And I do have people that I work with that have that email. And, you know, it's finding a, you know, professional way, an appropriate way of letting them know when they, like, I've had them accidentally send me something that was work related to my personal email. And I'm like, I need you to resend it, because if I go to search for it, I'm not going to find it because it didn't come from you to my personal, you know, to my work email.
I think another important thing is just setting up expectations. I really openly I think it's also really different if you're a student, particularly a grad student. You oftentimes can't bind your work days to between 9 and 5. And so I don't work on Saturdays. Everyone that I work with, every class that I have TA'd for, I let them know that I don't check my email after work on Friday until Sunday early afternoon. And so if you email me in that time, just know that I won't be getting back to you until at least Sunday evening. And so then no one can be disappointed or frustrated. And if they are, then the responsibility is on them, because I really clearly communicate that on a regular basis.
I think that's such a good point. Just back to those boundaries. Like, it's so important to set those early on too. And sometimes it's hard to know what we wanted our boundary to be until it's been violated. You know, even when that happens, to notice that, hey, I'm feeling like this is a violation. And instead of waiting 3 months to address it because you felt like it's too late, address it right away and say, you know what, hey, I've been getting a lot of emails on Saturdays and I've been stressed about it because of COVID and whatever. I'm going to stop checking, and this is my new boundary. And just being direct and clear and upfront about that, I think, is important.
And it's the sort of thing that you can ask about as well. I have absolutely interviewed people who've asked about, you know, work-life balance is often what you'll hear it sort of couched as, or, you know, things like that. I think that's super appropriate and really reasonable to say, you know, are people doing a lot of emailing on the weekends in this particular role? And so if that's something you can kind of align your personal needs and values with as you're job hunting and talking with people, for sure.
That brought up one other thought was with emails and on the weekends, my cell phone, I have my personal email set up on my cell phone, but to check my work email, I have to go into a website to do it. And so it's not automatically popping up. It's not automatically dinging on my computer. It's just my friends emailing my personal email that comes onto my phone. So that does allow me that separation. I have to consciously decide to go check my work email. It's not invading on my time when I'm at home unless I'm choosing to do that.
I have a question, and maybe this is more geared toward Chris and Allie, but I'm sure any of you can answer. I think what I've seen a lot of students struggle with is like during the interview and job searching process, when should they start to let employers know about their boundaries? And because they're afraid that if they say things or if they don't act like they are there 24/7 and want to work 110% all of the time, that they won't get the job. So like where in that process is it appropriate or good to do those things?
I mean, I think at the beginning of the process, and I mean, we're always very transparent about, you know, these are the work hours, these are the expectations. You know, if you are supporting, you know, a customer, there might be times when you are expected to answer an email or deal with a problem outside of normal hours. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does. And I think it just goes back to making sure that you're communicating. So if you're having some issues or you know, mentally need a break, it's communicating that with your manager.
I think there's some homework you could do ahead of time to look at the culture of the company that you're going to work for. Some companies have a different definition of work-life balance, and you just need to be careful if you don't align with that definition. So I would just recommend that you do some research ahead of time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, people ask me all the time, and as a recruiter, I make sure that I know for each role what that expectation is, because we do have some sales roles that after hours and weekends does come into play, and it's important that if someone is coming on board that they know that those are the expectations before we move forward. And if not, is there a workaround for that?
I think asking those questions in the interview process is good. You know, not necessarily setting your own boundaries, but finding out, is it a good fit? You know, does your company allow flex time? You know, what are the typical work hours of a person in this position? I don't think those are unreasonable or would be dings on you in an interview situation. You know, but I don't think the interview situation is a point where you say, I won't work weekends. You know, you can't really set that boundary. But if they say you're going to work 2 of the 4 weekends a month, and if that doesn't work for you, then maybe that's not the right company for you. But they may say you work 2 weekends a month, but you also have, you know, 4 other days out of the week, out of a month that you get to take off. You're swapping that time. So
Swinging that back around to on campus in terms of when to communicate with other people. I know often students are up late doing work and often doing work on the weekends, maybe not Saturday as much as Sunday, but what kinds of expectations should students have on, like, is it okay to send a professor an email at 1 a.m. when they're working on something? And what kinds of expectations should they have in terms of communication, dealing with that kind of thing?
I'd say, sure, send the email at 1 a.m. and I get them sometimes. Don't expect a response at 2 a.m. You know, so realize that whoever you're emailing, they may not respond until the next work day. But there's times I know when it's registration and a student panics and it's midnight and I happen to wake up at 2 in the morning and I look at my email and I answer them because I know they're panicked. And if they're up at 2 in the morning too, maybe they'll get it. So, you know, it just depends. But most of the time I wouldn't answer a question until the next work day.
I'll echo that. When I teach classes, I just put it in the syllabus. I'm a morning person. You will probably hear from me by 5:30 or 6 in the morning. You will not hear from me, and you cannot get in touch with me after about 8 o'clock at night. So I just kind of set that standard out myself as well, and then you know, kind of go from there. Obviously, they have access to my email, and then in some instances, in some of the classes, I'll just give them the cell phone too. and just let them know, don't send me emails over the weekend. If it's something that you need help with, just send me a text. And that way I get back in touch with you. So I would just follow the lead of the professor and see what they say. You can ask her or him, what is your preferred mechanism and when? And I think that's okay to ask as well.
It's a funny difference because I've been woken up at 1:30 in the morning by getting about 7 graded assignment emails come in at once, and then I wonder why my poor professor is up past midnight. So to kind of tie back to the interview situation, maybe both over Zoom but also in person, how do you effectively promote yourself as a person and convince them that you should be hired without seeming self-centered and thinking you're high and mighty and perfect?
Put yourself in the mind of the person who's hiring you and that team, and think about what kind of person they would potentially want to hire. And I think if you start there and start to couch those responses in that way, I think that'll lead you in the right direction. I like 30-second commercials. Hey, tell me about yourself. You can just kind of hit that, talk to them about what your background looks like, your experiences, what you expect to be able to help them out with on day one, and then what your interests are. So kind of allow your curiosity to drive that as well. I like telling stories, and so we will recommend to students that they develop 5 stories that they can tell an interviewer, and they should frame those stories in terms of situations that they've faced, tasks, actions, and results. And then I'll tell students it's effectively a rubric, and anytime a professor gave me a writing assignment with topics they wanted to cover, I put those as headers. And so as you're walking through those responses, I would just call them out. The situation was, the tasks, the actions were, and these were the results that we were able to get from that. And I think if you do that enthusiastically, focused on value for the company that you're going to join, and problem solving skills, I don't think you can ever go wrong.
Yeah, Chris, you very much hit on this, but so I've chaired a couple of committees on campus for hiring, and it literally was a rubric, right? We had a rubric in the job description. We said, did they hit on these things? But the people who we were able to most easily identify whether they'd hit on those things are the people who were really concrete. So you can tell me about how much you enjoy this thing and you like this thing, but you have to tell me about what you did with it. In order to convince me. And that also has the added benefit of not sounding inflated, because you have this proof to back it up. Like, not only do I, love working in this area, here's what I did with the skills and tools needed to work in this area, and here's how I accomplished or fixed something or did introduce something new. So really being concrete has led to the more standout interviews that I've definitely witnessed.
Think also about your nonverbal communications. Are you making eye contact with the person? And how are you holding your body? What are you looking at? Are you fidgeting? Because those things are going to say uncomfortable, even when your words are trying to say, I'm confident. And so if your body isn't saying confident, and so it may take some practicing, at looking yourself in the mirror and acting confident to portray that confidence.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that pretty much, Amy. It's about, there's a balance between listening to the person interviewing you and answering their questions, detailed and concisely, and preparing for that while being humble. I mean, you have to sell yourself. It's an interview, but again, balancing that out. And I think the best way to practice is to do a mock interview with, a parent, a friend, whoever. Look up interview questions to go through, Google the company you're interviewing with, and Glassdoor will have interview questions that they've asked previously. And just practice, and the more you do it, the better you'll get, and the more you're open to that constructive criticism and feedback, the better that, you're going to get each time.
Awesome. So kind of to keep going off of that, just how important is body language, both in person, all of this COVID stuff going on? How much do employers really pay attention to body language?
I would say all of us respond to body language. We just don't, it's all subconscious. We don't know we're responding to it. necessarily. I mean, if we think about it, we might recognize it, but I think there's a lot of body language that we're just responding to automatically. So it's not in the rubric, right? Did they look at their feet or did they look me in the eye? It's not on the rubric, but it's how did I feel about this person? And it ends up being more of a gut feeling, I think.
I would also say that like little things like eye contact are super important, but if an interviewer can tell that you're nervous, that's okay. That's almost expected, and it can be a good thing too because it shows that you care. So I mean, pretty much everyone gets nervous in an interview, and again, I think it just goes back to practicing that and being okay and really trying to authentically be yourself when you're interviewing.
I want to change the subject a little bit. We haven't really talked about this, and I see this as a great question. How do you bounce back after bad communication? So you've sent an email to a professor and you notice, lots of errors, or you said something wrong, or you sent an email or communicated with somebody and they were offended, or, you wish you had said something in an interview and you just know you messed up. How do you handle that? How do you come back?
Well, I just apologize. I'm sorry. I failed to articulate what I really wanted to say there. Or I'm sorry, I did not mean to be offensive. I'm terribly sorry. I'm ashamed. I'm embarrassed. This is what I meant to say. So I just own it, move forward, and then it's water under the bridge. Let it go. And don't beat yourself up after it either. It's all a learning process.
When you do send a clear email and it comes back where they didn't understand it anyway, and they flip it around, how do you point that out? You made an error to someone else to make sure that the communication ends up clear. And a lot of times I just take it on myself and say, sorry if I wasn't clear, this is what I meant. And my errors usually come in that I'm too wordy in my email, and then they skim it and don't get the full understanding. And so then when I respond, I'll say, well, sorry, I wasn't clear. And I try to shorten my information and hopefully get my point across. But I usually take it on, even though I know what I wrote, they just misunderstood.
And it's interesting because, I've gotten involved with some neat things out there in the world. And what I've noticed is that the people at the highest level, right, of business, government, that's how they write. It's just very simple, very clear, and with as few words as possible.
So to sort of keep going off of that, I am definitely someone who struggles with this myself. How do you make sure that a message is clear and detailed enough, but also make sure that it's short and precise?
I break my email down into two parts. I do a bulleted list of what they're going to find below. If there's a lot of details down below, I'll do a bulleted list of these are the topics that you're going to find down below, and then I do more of the details. I'm a lot about bulleted lists, so more of a resume style of information, so that at a glance they can find the important pieces.
Yeah, I do something similar to Amy, and sometimes if the email is short enough that I'm not going to do a bulleted list, I will bold the information that needs to be like the takeaway, like my specific question or the specific task I'm assigning someone. I'll bold that in the few sentence email, so then people's eyes are naturally drawn to the thing I want them to see.
I like to load my action, what I'm asking for, up front. That is the first sentence. It is a standalone sentence. That's the first thing you're going to see. Then I get into context, and then I go from there. Very formulaic. Every email you'll ever receive from me, probably with an action, starts out with the action up front. What my ask is up front. So,
what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make in professional communication?
There was a great video I used to like to watch. Today we salute you, Mr. Long-winded debriefer. So I think too lengthy. You have to be careful. You don't I mean, this should be obvious, but you don't want to ever slip into vulgarity, right? So it always, even if it's informal, it still needs to be very professional.
One of the biggest things that I've learned that I was really not good at was rereading emails that I would send. And it's because I'm so impatient and I want things to move so quickly. And I've learned, over the last however many years that I have to reread and sometimes read it multiple times to make sure that I'm not missing anything, that it's sounding right. I'm communicating with interview candidates. I'm making those first impressions with the company that I represent. I'm working with managers and C-suite level people. So it's so important, whoever you're reaching out to, that you're reading the emails and making sure that communication is clear. You're catching any mistakes, and the less mistakes you have, the more professional you're going to come across and be able to effectively communicate.
So also rereading the email that was sent to you, because the person communicating with you may not have communicated clearly. And if you're reading through it quickly and trying to get something done, read through and make sure that you are taking care of what they asked for. I wouldn't say it's a big mistake, but one of the difficulties I see is when someone responds to an email I sent, but they don't have a copy of my original email that they're replying to, that they reply to me, but not to the email. So I don't even know what I sent them prior. So I'll have sent them a bunch of information, and then they send me an email back and ask me a question about what I just sent them. But that email isn't included. And I think it's in email settings. So make sure your settings keep that email string going on, because that back and forth sometimes is necessary to look back at.
And I mean, I guess my perspective is a little more school and class oriented. But when you're in a course that has a professor and a TA, make sure that you're communicating with the right side of the class. TAs often aren't responsible, at least in my department, aren't often responsible for the lecture. So asking me about lecture materials, I don't even attend the class as a TA. So I have no information that can be helpful for you. And alternatively, depending on where I am in grading the lab assignments, the professor might not have looked at them yet. And so it might be that only I have seen what happened. And so just, if that information isn't clear from the beginning of the class, asking would be my recommendation.
Husky Hour is brought to you by the Center for Student Mental Health and Wellbeing. Visit mtu.edu/well-being for more information about programs, events, and workshops. Thanks for listening.